guys, it's Fabien here to finally review Season 1 of House of the Dragon. And this show, it takes... Hi. I don't normally chime in to the video this early on, but I just want to say that the way I described this show, I don't know what I was really talking about. I don't think I explained the plot very well at all, so just so I'm able to give a more accurate description of what the show really is about, I'm just going to go ahead and kind of redo what I initially said. Basically, the show, it takes place about 200 years before the events of Game of Thrones. We see the Targaryens at a very different period of their life when they were actually at the height of their popularity, and there was this sense of peace and tranquility within the world, but as things, went on, there were events that ended up happening, and eventually they ended up sparking and igniting a war between all of them that will eventually lead to their ultimate decline. So when it comes to this show, I was very skeptical going into it. The last season of Game of Thrones was not the most satisfying, not the most exciting, to say the least. There was a lot, it was exciting, but not in the best ways. There was a lot of things that just didn't really work, particularly the series finale, especially didn't really work for me. And so when the show was announced, I was kind of like, I'm here for more Game of Thrones. I'm here for, getting more, kind of visiting other time periods within within that world and things like that. I'm excited to go back there, but I was very dubious on whether or not the world of Westeros and furthering the story and getting to kind of showcase a different time period, if it was really going to be worth it. I didn't know if it was really going to work out, and I just didn't really know what more stories could be tell. I was really worried to see how this was all going to play out. And so, I was still trying to keep up hope that maybe the show would deliver, but my God, I was not prepared for how much this show would actually surprise me, because not only did House of the Dragon do such a great job of forging its own path and, creating its own identity, but it kind of reminds us of how compelling this show can be when you focus on the bare essentials, when you veer away from the spectacle and you focus more on the machinations, politics and things like that. It is so much more exciting. It is so much more compelling to watch, and that's really when this first season is at its best and what really makes it work as well as it does. Now, the thing I will say right off the bat is, obviously, this first season's been out for a while. I'm not going to structure this in the way I typically do a regular review. This is going to be more of an overview of sorts, talking about Season 1 and all the things that happened, and kind of doing an analysis on characters and things like that, just because, one, like I said, this season's been out for a while. Two, also, the premiere of Season 2 has been out since Sunday, so I know that this is a bit delayed, but I wanted to go ahead and rewatch all of Season 1 again, because I did watch it at the time, and I meant to do individual episode reviews, but I just didn't. I don't know why I didn't. I just didn't get around to it when Season 1 first came out. But I wanted to go ahead and just kind of go through it again, and I feel like on a rewatch, I picked up on so many, there were so many more things that I ended up picking up on, so I'm honestly glad that I watched through this season twice, because I think if I had reviewed it initially, I don't think it would have been as good of a review as it's going to be now, so we're just going to go ahead and dive into all of it. Now, before we get to that character analysis, though, I do want to hit on just a couple general things that I think really end up working well with this season. First off is the direction of this season, I think, is so well done. Something immediately I notice about this show is just how well handled so much of this is put together. Ryan Condal and Miguel Sapochnik, they clearly have a vision for this show. They know what they want this show to be. They understand the story that they're telling. It doesn't just feel like they are taking source material and, trying to just, kind of adapt it. It feels like, and from what I've heard, actually, they make quite a few deviations to the story this season, and I think that's really good. That's something that we just weren't able to get in the previous show. We saw the flaws much clearer once we had to deviate from the source material. This show, I think, actually is elevated by the fact that it is deviating away from that source material, and that you have these, you have some really strong direction in play, because while, yes, there is a lot of this show that is really exciting to watch, this really is this tragedy all around, and I think that's something that Condal and I think that's something that Condal and Sapochnik just do a really good job of portraying this season, is really just showing the underlying tragedy of it all, and that's something I was very impressed by in the show. While, like I said, while there are those moments of triumph, it feels a lot more fleeting compared to Game of Thrones, and I think that's because, I mean, one, the inherent nature that we know what's going to happen. We know this is a prequel. We know that things aren't going to go well for these characters. But I think it's also just the way this story is done. I think really at the end of the day, House of the Dragon is about how, despite the fact that someone believes in their cause, they are just dooming themselves to failure. All these characters in this show are dooming themselves to extinction. They're dooming themselves to failure, and they're the reason why the Targaryens are not in power by the time we get to, Game of Thrones. And I think that's something that this show does a really good job of communicating, but also kind of being the social commentary just about self-fulfilling prophecies, and how, when we believe, despite the fact that we constantly are believing in something, are we actually going to do something to, try to change it? Or are we just going to continue to believe the same thing the other side believes, but not realizing that they also believe that? And I think that's the case for a lot of the characters in the show. So many of these characters think that they are in the right for what they are doing, and that's what makes for really grounded characters. But at the end of the day, they themselves are just continuing to, let their whole to let their whole family implode, let their whole legacy implode, and we see that throughout this show. But the thing that really just sticks out to me the most, I think, and what is so impressive, is that so much of this season is basically just exposition. If you really want to break it down, that is so much of what this is. It feels like this event happens, and then this event happens, and then this event happens, yet it never feels that way when you're watching the show. It feels like we are telling this story throughout, and it feels coherent, and it doesn't feel like it's jumping around constantly, because while there is, yes, a plethora of time jumps, and while there is a lot of characters here, what they recognize works in this show already are the character dynamics. And what I appreciate about the show is that underneath all of the, huge set pieces and all the plotting going on, it really is very character driven. And that's something that I think is just really impressive about this show, is that they're able to give you so much tension, and they're able to give you so much investment in simply just connecting with characters. And I think that's something that was a very, not underrated quality, but something that I think Game of Thrones just really ended up excelling at. I think, we focus a lot on the set design, we focus a lot on the big set pieces, but the reason why those last few seasons didn't hit the same is because they started to veer away from the more slower moving, character driven moments. That's what really ended up, I think, helping the show succeed in the earlier seasons. I mean, you think of like Tyrion's trial in season 4, or there's a bunch of other examples I could give, but that's really the first one that comes to mind for me. Think of how much that scene is driven by the dialogue, driven by his motivations. We feel for him not just because of Peter Dinklage's performance, it's obviously fantastic, but it also is because of Tyrion just ending up someone that feels disregarded, feeling like he's ignored, feeling like people aren't taking him seriously, and that's really what works in that scene. That's him finally, that's him finally owning up to how he feels, and feeling, and feeling anger and hatred driven through him. You finally feel it in that scene. And while, yes, like I said, there's a lot of great spectacle in that show, those scenes are nothing without those slower moving moments. Even moments early on in the show, like, for example, example, the Red Wedding or Joffrey's death, those are all built up by dialogue. They're all built up by slower moving scenes, and that's something that they really recognize in this show, is that you can feel just as riveted and just as blown away by incredible dialogue and just seeing characters, in these situations as these bigger set pieces. In fact, there aren't as many this season, and I think that honestly is for the best. I think it speaks to a lot that maybe the most effective scene of this entire season is watching Viserys slowly walk into the courtroom, basically on his deathbed, to defend Rhaenyra, and because of how invested we are in these characters, and I think that works so well within this show. So I think while, yes, we love the spectacle, we love, the production design, all of that is great. I think what really makes this first season work as well as it does is how, yes, even though there's a lot of time jumps, it all really does end up being character driven. It all does end up being focusing on these characters' motivations for why they make the choices that they do, but also getting us to fully understand just how nuanced so many of them are. And that's what I love about this show, is that I've seen a lot of takes in, throughout this show that honestly just feel very one-sided. They feel very surface level. And I think that is completely antithetical to what this show is all about. I think so much of this show is about nuance. I think so much of this show is about understanding, but also not justifying characters' motivations. There are a lot of characters in this show that do a lot of hateful shit, and they do a lot of things that are very unethical. But I think because of how well they're written, you're able to understand why they would do the things that they do, and that's something I just really adore about the show overall. So yeah, before I get into character analysis and things like that, that's just something that I'm just generally very impressed by in the show, is that in a show that has so many cruel people doing cruel things to each other, and people who are very selfish, they all have their own motivation for what they're doing. They all have their own layers to them. Nobody is truly good or truly bad, even the worst of characters. And that's something I think is just really impressive in this show, is that they really just get you to understand everyone, and really just you find yourself latching onto all these characters as a result. And yes, from a cinematography perspective, I mean, this show just continues to blow you away. What I think is really great is that you usually, a lot of the time when you have a spinoff of a show, it feels cheaper. It feels like they have stripped away the budget of what the previous show was, and it feels like they just aren't as putting as much effort into it. And this show, that's very much not the case. I think, honestly, it shows how much things have evolved with just how incredible everything does look. The world, despite focusing on just one family, still feels so incredibly vast, and you really do feel that throughout this show. I think one of the best moments of this entire season is seeing Aemond riding Vhagar and things like that. That whole sequence is absolutely stunning, and the look of the dragons are just so incredibly tangible, and they fit so well within this series. I think they just do a really great job when it comes to the cinematography. They could have easily, I think, slashed the budget in half, but they really don't. They put just as much effort into it, and it really does it really does shine as a result. Like I said, there isn't a ton of spectacle this season, but when it's there, it very much does deliver. And that's something I really just appreciate about the show. The score continues to be fantastic. I don't have a problem with the fact that they reuse the Game of Thrones theme. I think it fits this show, but I also like that there is a lot of original theme here, and I think that that also really does stick out to you. And then the editing of the season. This is really the one thing I will get out of the way right now. Yes, most of this season we have these really big jumps in time going on, especially towards the halfway point, and while I think for the most part it is justified as to why the time jump is happening, and I think the show does a good enough job to get you to catch us up on what we missed, there is a lot of gaps in between that I just wish the show would have spent a bit more time on. The one character in particular I just feel like I don't have enough of an understanding of is Harwin Strachan. And he honestly is a very important character. Yes, he's only in one episode, but he's the father to Rhaenyra's children. Well,
allegedly, we don't know for sure, but pretty sure he is. He seems to have a generally good relationship with them, and he cares about Rhaenyra, but I just don't feel like we really got a chance to see that relationship, see why this matters so much to Rhaenyra when things start to happen to him. I wish we got a bit more explanation. Then the only other characters that I hope just get a bit more time in season 2 are the Velaryons. I enjoy Corlys a lot. I like how loyal he is. I like how noble he is to his family. But there's a large portion of the season where he is off and we think that he's presumed dead. And I just feel like the show didn't do enough with his character after the first 5 episodes. So those are really the only characters that I think, those are really the only things I think the show needed to touch upon a bit more. I think everything else, they do a really good job of getting us to understand these characters, getting us to understand not just the stuff that we're seeing, but also those moments in between. But I do think sometimes it does hurt the show a bit because there are things that happen in between those years that I would have liked to see. So I think that's really the only thing that holds the season back for me. So I'll just get that out of the way right now. But other than that, I think the season's very well paced. I never found myself bored by what was going on, but I also didn't feel like I was underwhelmed by anything. I thought everything, for the most part, was still well paced, despite the fact that there are some things I wish they touched upon more. I don't think it is to the detriment of the season overall. Alright, so with that said, now we're going to go ahead and get into a deeper character analysis. Now, obviously, I'm not going to talk about every character here. I'm mainly just going to talk about the key figures in this show, get us to understand their motivations, but also kind of offer maybe a different interpretation towards these characters that we maybe didn't see before, but also kind of just, again, showcase that complexity, showcase that nuance. There is no character in this show that doesn't have that, and that's something I just really appreciate. And I think, believe it or not, the first character I'm actually going to talk about, it's not Rhaenyra or Alicent. I gotta start off by talking about Viserys here, because I think he's a very interesting character in this show. He essentially is a good person. Like, there aren't many people in the show that I can say, that's a good person. That person generally has good intentions. But Viserys does. He's a good person. He's trying to do right by everyone around him, but he also wants to keep his family together. That's what he really is all about, and I think that he would succeed in doing that if he wasn't put in the position that he is, because essentially we're watching somebody in the show who is a king, but really just should have never been in that role. That's the thing, is that we find out, literally in the first scene of the show, that he was put into this role based solely upon his gender. This is not a title that he, I think, really deserved, nor did I think he really wanted. And as a result, he just doesn't, this was supposed to be something that Rhaenys, his cousin, was expecting to have. She, by all intents and purposes, should have been given that title, but because of this very dated and sexist prophecy, he was the one given the title instead, and really just should have never done that, because he doesn't have the correct type of qualities to really be a king. I mean, yes, we see him in the show. He is someone that, like I said, cares a lot about his family, but that really is to his detriment. I would argue he's too caring towards his family, because his good intentions are easily also his biggest flaw in this show. I mean, when we see him early on in the season, how do you present him? He's very easygoing, and he almost creates his meetings with all of his staff almost like they're this like chill sort of dining hall. Like, that's how he prefers to do it. And yet he's so, and he, we find out that Westeros is in this period of peace around this time. There hasn't really been a lot of war. There hasn't been a lot of conflict, and that's great. But the thing about that is that he doesn't seem to recognize how he can maintain that. When he's alerted about, like, the threat of the crab feeder and things like that, he doesn't really pay it any mind. So he's constantly overlooking these threats that are presented to him, and we see very early on why this is a problem. And that's also because he's so naive. He never recognizes the conflict that's actually going on. He never is, fully aware of what's going on around him. And I think that's something else that is a big issue when it comes to Viserys, is that yes, he has this love for his family, but again, because he's so fixated on that, he just isn't able to understand real conflict, and he lets everybody around him manipulate him as a result. When it comes to Rhaenyra, whether this is Otto, whether this is the Velaryons, there's very few choices that Viserys makes in this show that are entirely his own. And I think that's what's very interesting about his character. There are plenty of times in this show where it's like, well, you know deep down he doesn't believe that. For example, when Rhaenyra is accused of having sex with Daemon, while Viserys is quick to defend her, you can also see that deep down he actually doesn't believe her. He actually thinks that she might have done it, but because of the fact that he feels he needs to defend her, he does. And I think that is very interesting about his character overall. I think he's just too caught up in his beliefs. So much of what he does in this show is based on, well, this prophecy of Aegon the Conqueror said this, so therefore this is something that we need to do. And you know, the whole reason Rhaenyra ends up assuming the position that she does is because he is told that a Targaryen has to be on the throne, and she has all of these qualities, but does she? And I think that's something that this show does a really good job of laying out. Is he correct in assuming that she should be the one on the throne? And I think that is very interesting overall. He also is so incredibly confident that everyone else believes those prophecies, that everyone else feels the same way, but he has no real evidence of showing that. He just blindly believes that everybody is just going to follow his orders, and I think that is something that works really well when it comes to Viserys. I think that he just believes that it's the right thing to do. But the other thing about Viserys is that I think he really limits himself in terms of options. This is a king who really has a lot of people on his side. From the start of the show, he has the Velaryons, he has the Hightowers, he has Rhaenyra, he has a lot of people backing him. But yet he's never able to understand, you know, the full extent of his power. And as a result, he constantly is limiting himself. When he chooses to marry Alicent, I don't think it's because he really wants to. I think he feels like he kind of has to. You know, she was someone that gave him this emotional support when he lost the love of his life in Emma, and he's never really been able to fully reconcile with it, and she was someone who kind of helped him through that situation. So he saw it as like, well, if she helped me through that, she can help me through everything else. But, you know, he's presented this other option of Laena very early on, but he feels very uncomfortable because she's a very young child, but so is Alicent. And so you kind of feel like, well, you don't necessarily need to limit yourself. When he even lets Rhaenyra, you know, have this whole sort of have this whole sort of haul just based on her, you know, someone to marry her, someone for her to choose of her own. And, you know, you kind of think, well, you don't really need to, and you kind of think, well, why couldn't you have done that for yourself? Why did you feel that these two were your only options in play? And I think that's what's really interesting about Viserys, that he doesn't really understand the full extent of his power. And I think that him marrying Alicent is a perfect example of that. I don't think he ever really wanted to marry her. I think he just wanted emotional support. He saw that she was caring for him during his time of need and thought that, well, because she, you know, I have something to invest in with her. I don't have that with Laena. I'm uncomfortable by Laena. I can at least justify marrying Alicent for this reason, but didn't really think through of what are the consequences going to be of this. Well, my daughter's probably going to be a bit resentful towards me. She's not going to like the fact that I didn't tell her about it. And that's what kind of ends up happening. While yes, he is very supportive and loyal to Rhaenyra, there's plenty of times that he isn't really the greatest father to her. You know, yes, he is defending her in that sense, but there's plenty of times where she needs him and he just isn't there for her. He doesn't console her when she needs him. He doesn't really recognize how she's feeling during certain points. He doesn't say the right things to her. He doesn't try to understand why she's feeling this way. And this extends to the rest of his children. While yes, he is supportive towards Rhaenyra, when it comes to his other kids, I mean, he has very little relationship with them. He never takes the time to get to know Aegon or Aemond or Helena or anyone like that. Instead, he just kind of disciplines them when he feels it's necessary. When Aemond has his eye taken away, for example, there's never a moment where Viserys tries to understand, why does Aemond have this rage within him? Why is Aemond so upset with what's happening? Could I have been the reason for that? Instead, he just disciplines him, and same with Aegon. He never tries to understand any of his children, and so he's never really invested any time with them because he doesn't recognize how severe things have become. He still thinks so far into his older age that things are the way they were when he was, younger, when he was in his prime, and they simply are not. And a lot of the reason why he is so unaware of what's going on is because he has some stuff that he also is dealing with. Early on the show, he's getting cut by the throne, which symbolizes, I think, how unfit he really is to rule. But I think as we continue to see him rot away physically, I mean, he has like his arm taken away. By the end of the show, like half of his face is gone. He literally becomes almost a corpse by the end of the show. I think it also is symbolizing just how irrelevant and ineffective he has become. He wants to be this beacon of hope of sorts, and I think in some ways he is, but he never was able to fully apply himself, and as a result, he just doesn't have the power that he once did. So even though after so much time of him being manipulated, being complacent towards others, he, takes this action about finally trying to end this division between Rhaenyra and Alicent. You see him do that, it's like, well, this should have been done a lot earlier on. He should have recognized the tension that was going on between them. He should have recognized that things weren't great between Rhaenyra and Alicent, that maybe Rhaenyra was harboring some feelings towards Alicent for marrying Viserys. Maybe Alicent was feeling some type of way about Rhaenyra because of, the way that she was disregarding her kids and things like that. He never really tried to do that. And so, while yes, at first, it's very effective, and it probably is the most emotional scene of the entire show when he talks about that they need to stop the war, and he is and they need to put aside their differences for the sake of the crown, and they need to just be a family again. And it seems like at first it is effective with what he's doing, because for Rhaenyra and Alicent, it is. I don't think these two ever wanted to be rivals. I don't think these two ever wanted to be at each other's throats. So when he talks to them, yes, they are able to work things out. They are able to come to that agreement. It seems like the two of them are actually going to bury the hatchet. But the problem is, because he didn't invest any time in the rest of his kids, he wasn't able to, what he did wasn't effective towards them. It didn't really have any impact on them. But he doesn't have that sort of cutthroat nature. He's someone who is kind of scared to do so. He feels like he doesn't have that, bureaucratic sort of nature within him. He doesn't really care about that stuff. He just cares about being a good father, and he just cares about being a good person and trying to help his family. And I think that because of that, he just isn't able to do what he wanted. And I think his arc is very tragic in that way, because I think he wanted to unite his family. He wanted to be this protector. And I think if he had been more vocal or taken his role more seriously, a lot of what happens in the show could have been prevented. All the bloodshed, all the tension, it did not have to escalate to the point that it did. But because, again, he was so neglectful towards so many people in his life, was never really able to understand the full extent of his power, but also wasn't really aware of what was going on around him, it just made it so he is a indirect, maybe not the direct, but an indirect cause of a lot of the tension that happened within this show. I think, again, if he had spent more time trying to, having a bit more self-awareness and recognizing what was going on, I think a lot of stuff in the show could have been prevented, and I think that's something that they just do a really great job with overall. So I think he is such a interesting character, because he is generally like a good person trying to do good things, but he's doing so in a world where his methods aren't effective. His methods aren't applicable to, what the state of the world is, to his particular, to the situation and everything that has gone down. What he is trying to do is not the correct approach, and I think that's something that the show just does a really great job at demonstrating. It gets you to understand Viserys as someone who, like I said, deep down cared about his family, cared about his daughter, cared about all these things in his life, but because he was so caught up in his own beliefs and not able to recognize the full extent of his power, and given this role that he never really was supposed to have, he wasn't able to live to his full potential. And I think that is what is so tragic about his character overall, and I think that is demonstrated so well throughout this season. Even when he dies in the show, despite the fact that, like I said, what he did wasn't as effective as he was hoping, I think he was sort of this barrier of sorts. He was what was keeping things from getting to this all-out war that things are by the end of the show. He was the person keeping things from fully igniting because he was able to cover up for Rhaenyra constantly, because he was able to, have these conversations of Alicent and Rhaenyra, remind them of the friendship that they used to have, because there's so much history when it comes to those characters, because Daemon as a brother generally loved him. We'll talk about him in a little bit. But because of the other, future generations that he didn't really spend any time investing in, because of other conflicts that he avoided, he wasn't really able to do what he wanted. He wasn't able to be, he wanted to end out his days as the person that was going to, put an end to everything. And I think in his mind, he thinks that he did, but unfortunately, that wasn't the case. And he actually makes things so much worse by the end when, because of his, delirium with him having this milk of the poppy and things like that, Alicent misunderstands him, thinks he's talking about Aegon, their son, when he's really talking about Aegon the Conqueror. And I think that really just stems again to who Viserys really was. At the end of the day, he was a man based upon this prophecy. He, in many ways, I think, can relate to Helena in that way, because she is also this dragon dreamer of sorts and someone who is so caught up in her own beliefs, and I think that was very much the case with Viserys. So again, just such an interesting character, because I think by the end of the show, he's someone that by the end of the season, he's someone we generally really do love. But I also think we forget just how, despite the fact that he has a lot of good qualities to him, he still isn't very effective in a lot of what he is doing. A lot of what he's trying to get across, it just doesn't really end up working out. Yes, his loyalty towards Rhaenyra. Yes, some of the other things he does really works. Yes, I think the reason why things work out in Rhaenyra's trial is because he was there to defend her. But again, because he had this loyalty towards Rhaenyra, he disregarded the rest of his family, and it kind of just escalated things to the point that it did. And Paddy Considine is extraordinary in this show. I mean, all the performances here are incredible, but his performance in particular is so striking because he does a great job of just showcasing the humanity, but also, I think, the compassion that this character really does have in a world where so many of these characters just simply don't have that. So many of these characters have these, selfish needs. I think Viserys is one of the truly good people in this show, and I think that's something we really do showcase throughout this season, but also, again, showcasing the naivety, showcasing the sort of, the very lackadaisical approach he has to things. I think that Considine just does such a great job of representing all of that and really gets us to latch onto this character in a way that gets us to both sympathize for him, but also kind of pity him. While on one hand, you feel bad for him, on the other hand, you're kind of like, well, you kind of did this to yourself. And so, well, I think by the end, when he dies, it's very effective. It's very tragic. You also are thinking about what he could have done to prevent all of this, what he really could have done to stop himself from getting to the point that he did. Could he have been more effective? And I think that's something that Considine just does such a great job in fully understanding in this show as an actor. So I think that character on his own is very intriguing, and I really like a lot of the work that they do with him. But we gotta talk about Daemon here, who is kind of the polar opposite of Viserys, but I think also is a different character than what's initially presented. When the show starts off, I kind of thought that maybe he's gonna be the main antagonist. I mean, he's very volatile, he's very reckless, he's clearly vying for the throne. It seemed like that was going to be the case. And I thought, throughout a good majority of the show, it was going to be about Rhaenyra and Daemon and their sort of back and forth, and that was going to be the ultimate sort of power battle. And, well, it really doesn't go down that road at all. And I think that's because of how we really, and I think that really is to the benefits of this character. Not only is Matt Smith just so good in this role, taking a character that I think on paper could be so incredibly unlikable and vile, and finds a way to bring out the humanity in him, and finds a way to bring out these, these layers to him that get you to really understand his character. But he also is just such a charismatic actor. I've always found Matt Smith to be such a showman as an actor. He's someone who just really puts his all into a role, and that's exactly the case when it comes to Daemon. This is a very multifaceted character, and Smith just really leans into all of that, and I just really enjoyed the performance he ended up giving throughout this season. And the one thing to really note about Daemon is, despite the fact that, like I said, he has this very sort of violent and cutthroat nature to him, he also is, on record, George R. R. Martin's favorite character in this series. And I think that is very interesting. The fact that he is so attached to this character. And I think I can kind of understand why, because despite the fact that he is this loose cannon, at any second, you never know what he's going to do. He's so unpredictable in that nature. Underneath all that is a guy who generally just wants to be loved and accepted by his brother. He's someone that actually does care about him. The scene in the first episode when he's talking to his brother about how, he has these good leadership qualities and things like that, and he wants to have that connection with him, and his brother is and Viserys is disregarding him. I think that's genuine. I think he generally does care for Viserys. I think he wanted to be, in this position that Otto was. I think he wishes that he had that role as sort of the, assistant to the king and things like that. I think he wishes he had that role, and because of that, I think throughout this show, he is trying to do what he can to prove himself. That's his whole thing, is that he wants to do what he can to prove himself to others. And I think a perfect example of this is the Battle of Crabfeeder. When he is in that situation where it seems like they are losing, it seems like things are really dire and they are just going to get decimated, he is the one to rise up and not really care about whether or not he comes out alive. He just cares that he looks like a hero. He just cares that he is the one that comes out looking victorious. And that's exactly what happens. I mean, he slaughters all of the men in that battle on the opposing side, and as a result, he is rewarded for it. And I think that's what Daemon really is all about. He wants to feel this vulnerability. He wants to feel accepted. And the only way that he can is to feel that he has to constantly prove himself. He always has to feel like he hasn't lived up to his potential. And I think that's very interesting when it comes to his character. Now, the way he decides to go about it is very questionable. What he does with Rhaenyra in particular, someone who generally, yes, she does have some sort of infatuation for him, but he never tries to fend her off. He just goes for it. And in a way, it very much is grooming. And you see him do that throughout this show. I mean, the way that he does that in a way to where he can kind of control her and he can kind of manipulate her into doing what he wants to do. You really see that throughout this show. I think that his entire relation with her is this manipulation tactic. In his head, he sees it as love. He sees this as, yes, I love her. Yes, I care about her. But the way he loves her is definitely very unethical, and I think that is what's so interesting about Daemon as a character. Even when it comes to Laenor, I think the way that Daemon goes about that, making Rhaenyra believe that, well, you don't want, we can just dispose of Laenor, and kills an innocent man as a result, but also now lets Rhaenys and Corlys think that Rhaenyra killed Laenor and doesn't try to do anything to cover up for her. Again, it shows that selfish side within him. He's not really in it for Rhaenyra. He's not really in it for he's not really in it for her love. I think their whole marriage, their whole romance, it's not at all supposed to be something that is positive. It is something that Rhaenyra kind of lusted for, but Daemon always but I think Damon always sort of, again, he never tried to reject those advances. He never tried to do anything to stop her from that. He himself just kind of went for it because I think he saw it as, well, Rhaenyra is my path to the Iron Throne. Rhaenyra is my path to finally showcase my potential, and that's exactly what he's doing. Yes, he's fighting for her now, but he also choked her. He also tried to get her to provoke a war that she didn't want to provoke. So again, I think he has his own agenda, and I think we're going to see that throughout the trajectory of this next season. But yet you also understand that he just is trying to prove himself. That's why he is that way, and I think, again, that's what makes him such a great character overall, is that he feels the need to constantly need to prove himself to others. He wants to be feared also. He wants to be someone that people are scared of, but he doesn't realize that that's kind of what keeps driving people away. What is the reason why Viserys doesn't want him involved in his life? Well, it's because of how unpredictable and violent he is. Why is he so adamant about Rhaenyra being heir? Because he wants to keep Daemon away. Why is Otto given this role? Because Daemon can't have it. He wants to make sure that Daemon doesn't have it. And so I think that's the big thing with Daemon throughout the show, is that he wants to be seen as this person that people are constantly, intimidated by. He wants people to see him as someone that is, very scary, but he doesn't realize that that's why it isn't working for him. And then one time he has any sort of backing behind him, and he has any sort of peace, he doesn't like it. He doesn't feel like this is him living up to his full potential. I think in another world, I think him living out his days with Laena, that would have been ideal for him. That's the one time he can actually feel like, okay, maybe I can just be happy with how my life has been, but yet he isn't satisfied because he isn't, doing anything reckless. He isn't involving himself in anything that is going to be questioned by others. That's just what he enjoys doing. So he's kind of this prisoner in his own mind where he has to constantly feel misery and suffering in order to feel good about himself. He needs to feel this chaos to be satisfied. I think that's why he is so eager to charge into battle, to constantly slaughter all these different characters, to constantly engage in reckless activity, because again, he wants to be seen as the hero. He wants to be seen as the person to rally up all the troops, and I think that's what's so interesting about his character. He's so unpredictable in that way, and that's why people fear him, but he also doesn't realize that that is entirely why people are always casting him aside. That's why people don't want to associate with him, because of his, this sort of vindictive sort of nature that he has. And I think that's what's so great about Daemon as a character. I think it makes sense why George R. R. Martin likes him as a character, because again, he likes those vulnerable sort of qualities to him. He likes the fact that he is someone that isn't, someone who isn't ever satisfied. He isn't ever happy with how things have gone. He likes the fact that he is scrutinized. He wants people to fear him. But yet when suddenly he has that admiration, people are loving what he's doing. He's feeling bored. He's feeling like he doesn't have anything left to give. He wants something more. And I think that is really, you really understand what draws Martin to that character. I think, we as human beings always want to live, always want to feel like we are a work in progress. We always have more to give. We always need something that we want people to fear us. We want people to, we want people to be intimidated by us. We want to have that sort of bravado. But I think deep down, I think there's a lot of people that are like that, but yet Daemon's also somebody who, at the end of the day, he just wants to be loved. He just wants to be accepted. But because he never really was, he constantly feels like he's in a need to prove it to others. And so I think it makes sense why a character that, like I said, does a lot of stuff in this show that is very hard to justify. And I definitely am not going to justify. And there's a lot of things in this show that are very icky. You really are still able to latch onto him as a character, not just because of Smith's charisma, but also because of just how multifaceted and I think in some aspects relatable he really can be. So I think that's what works so well about his character throughout this show. Now, with all that said, understanding both Daemon and Viserys, we have to talk about really the main two characters of the show in both Rhaenyra and Alicent, and this is where we get to the fact that I'm happy I rewatched this season because I kind of had different interpretations of both of them when I rewatched this season. When it comes to Rhaenyra, I kind of saw Rhaenyra the first time I watched the show as the perfect candidate for the job. When she's, given the title of heir, this is something that she is deserved of. This is something that she should have. But now rewatching the season, I'm not so sure, honestly. I think that, there are a lot of things throughout the show that showcase the, that definitely showcase the leadership qualities that she has. I think she has the right things in mind. Like, for example, early on when she selects Criston Cole as, as her knights and things like that, I think that's, definitely the right thing to do. I think that, she definitely has the right sense in terms of, a lot of her qualities, in terms of the way that she cares for others and things like that. But the thing is that she is far from perfect. She's partaking throughout the show in a lot of very careless and very poor decisions, and they have very life-altering effects on her. A big one, obviously, is everything that goes down with her and, Laenor, that whole, getting herself into this marriage where she's aware that Laenor is gay, she's aware that Laenor is not into her, that Laenor likes this other guy and really should just let him live his life, is absolutely interfering in that relationship. But because this is something that was just bestowed upon her and told that she has to be with a Velaryon, really stemmed by her father wanting to do right by the fact that he did not choose Laena Velaryon and feeling like he has to kind of pay that debt to Corlys, she decides to go with Laenor, but really, honestly, should have probably gone with Vaemond. Despite the fact that Vaemond is somebody that is so resentful towards her later in life, Vaemond would have at least been able to provide for her, and they could have actually maybe had a good sort of marriage and things like that. And so I think that's something that is very interesting when it comes to Rhaenyra, but also her investment in Criston Cole, realizing that he is someone that doesn't really want the same thing as her. He doesn't necessarily want to just be her fling. He wants to have a more serious relationship with her. There's a point where he's ready to propose marriage and she ultimately declines it. And yeah, we can talk about how he's kind of an asshole for continuing to resent her for this for the rest of his life and still feeling like, she ruined him and things like that. I think that's definitely something that kind of gives that incel type energy that I've seen people talk about. But, I think a lot of what happens to Rhaenyra is her own doing. Now, the things that she does well, let's talk about that right off the bat. The one thing I really love about Rhaenyra as a character, and I do love Rhaenyra as a character, I think she's a fantastic lead character, and also, I will say right off the bat, both actors that portray Rhaenyra and Alicent are fantastic, but I gotta highlight Millie Alcock here because she came in as someone that I wasn't aware of as an actress and just makes such an immediate impression in the show. She is such a dynamic actress. She gets you to really latch onto Rhaenyra, showcasing those, brave sort of qualities that she has, the way she wants to go against the grain, but also showing someone who has this ambition, has this drive within her, really gets you to understand her character. But I also think just does such a great job of representing just who, the different sides of Rhaenyra, not trying to portray her as fully perfect, trying to showcase that she is deeply flawed in a lot of areas, which, like I said, I'll get into. And I think that, she does a really good job with that. And listen, Emma Darcy is fantastic too. Make no mistake, they give a fantastic performance in the show, showing Rhaenyra when she is not nearly as well respected as she once was and doesn't have the stature that she once did and is trying to do what she can to get back into the good graces and does a good job of representing that, especially in the finale. I think that they give a fantastic performance in this show. But Alcock really ends up being, like, I think this maybe the standout of this entire season, just because, again, this is the perfect definition of an actress that I wasn't aware of, and just immediately making me wanting to see her in everything. I am so happy she got the role that she did in the James Gunn Superman movie, because I think she's just going to absolutely own that role. And I love her commitment to this character. I love the effort that she puts into it. She's one of those actresses where just her facial expressions alone, you can understand how she's feeling, and she conveys, like I said, I think that ambition, but also the naivety within Rhaenyra so incredibly well in the show. I really enjoyed watching her character throughout this, and I just thought that she did a really great job. But anyway, the thing that I really love about Rhaenyra as a character is, one of the first major things that happens to her is that at first, she doesn't really care about royalty. She kind of just wants to be a normal teenager. She wants to just kind of have fun with, Alicent and things like that. But once her mother dies, I think this really opens up Rhaenyra's eyes to how much she can, how limited she was within her life. Because her mother saw her life as, well, this is what women are meant to do. Women are meant to bear children and really nothing else. They're there to provide for the men of the house, and Rhaenyra detests that. Rhaenyra hates the fact that that is what could become of her, and I think once her mother dies, she wants to do what she can to make sure that her life never amounts to simply just being that. She wants to be so much more. She's always aiming for the highest honor possible. And I think because of that, she's a character that wants to challenge all these norms within her life, even though she is told by Rhaenys that it's not really going to work out. She's told by multiple characters in this show that you're not always going to be in this position. You're not always going to be able to be honored and respected, and that this is temporary. She doesn't see it that way. She sees it as Viserys bestowed this upon her, and she deserves it as a result. And I think that is what is so interesting about her character, especially on this rewatch, is that she herself is very entitled in that way. She believes that this is what she deserves, and I think she kind of exhibits the worst qualities of Viserys in that way, where she just feels that things are just going to kind of happen for her. Like, she is going to be respected because Viserys gave her this honor of an heir, and people are going to respect that. She's not thinking about the people that might oppose that and think, well, she doesn't have the right qualities because of this, and this. She doesn't really care about that. And I think that is what's really interesting about her overall, is she makes a lot of decisions in this show and doesn't really think about the consequences that it's going to have on anybody. I mentioned, like I said, with Christian, how even though, yes, he's a dick and someone that I feel like throughout the show becomes less and less sympathetic, if she had reasoned with him, and really gotten to understand why she had to do what she was doing, maybe the switch that he undergoes throughout the show, where he, goes from someone that is so loyal to her, ready to give up his life, ready to marry her, ready to, put himself in, rejects the highest honor that he could possibly have of that white cape. Maybe if she had communicated to him better, maybe it could have been prevented when it comes to Alicent. Instead of lying to her about what happened between her and Kristen, and, just straight up lying to Alicent about it, maybe if she had just been honest with her, things could have been different. Now, obviously, yes, Alicent is both her mother and her best friend at that time, so it's a little dicey, but I think if she fully trusted Alicent, I think Alicent wouldn't have done anything about it. I think that it would have been dicey, yes, because of Otto, which we'll talk about, but I think that that's something that also could have been prevented. She isn't able to understand that people she engages with throughout the show, they don't have the position that she does. They don't have this royal stature. She just kind of assumes that they do, and as a result, because it doesn't affect her, she doesn't feel it affects them. And I think that's something that we see a lot with Rhaenyra, especially in the first 5 episodes of this show. I mean, she has a line where she basically says that, like, I don't really care about my action. She talks about she wants to live life without worrying about her action. She wants to live life, without worrying about the consequences. And you see why that is such a problem. And I think that is what is so interesting about Rhaenyra as a character. When it comes to later in life, the decisions that she decides to make, she generally, I think, loved Harwin. Honestly, I think her and Harwin had, and that's why I wish that we would have paid more attention to that relation, because I think that is the one person in her life that she generally did love, and I think could have had a really good relationship with, but she ends up having these bastard children that look absolutely nothing like Laenor. It's obvious that they don't look like Laenor, and this is something that she is, and this ends up being a major setback to her, because it's like, well, yes, we could award her this title, but look at her children. They're bastards. They're not the person that she was married to. They don't look like him. And so because of that, that is something that she is constantly dealing with throughout this show. But again, I also think that's something that could have been prevented if she would have taken a different Velaryon, or if she would have told her father that I have other options in mind, things maybe could have been differently. And that's the other interesting part of the show, is that despite the fact that Viserys is quick to defend her given every single situation, she still feels like she is overlooked in this show. She doesn't feel like she's given that much respect. And I think a lot of that is due to the fact that the hardest moments in her life, she doesn't have that person to really console her. She doesn't have that relation with Viserys, and that he's able to understand how she's feeling. The men in her life are always going to feel more respected, and I think that is what is really interesting here. And despite the fact that she is also, she's very family oriented, and she, has this love for her children and Viserys, anyone that isn't a part of her children, she holds in contempt pretty much. I mean, when it comes to Aemon, she absolutely resents him. She has zero relationship with him. She doesn't really seem to see him as her family, even though he very much is. And we'll talk about Aemon a little bit later. But she doesn't have any real relationship with him. And I think that also contributes to the downfall of her and Alicent, because I think if she would have tried to invest more time in her other siblings, I think things could have actually worked out for Rhaenyra, but she doesn't do that. So again, kind of representing that flaw of her father, where she doesn't invest time in other relationships that she doesn't feel are as important to her, or ones that kind of threaten her. She pushes them away. And so I think that's something that we also see, but she also is blindly defending her children throughout every situation. She never tries to see any sort of bad qualities in them. And I think that's because, again, her bad qualities, there's always a justification to them. There's always a reason why she acts the way that she does. So again, I think she's a very interesting character in that I think on one hand, you can understand why she feels the way that she does. She wants to feel like I am more than what I am given, and I deserve more than what I am given. But on the other hand, she doesn't seem to think about why someone might not be on her side. Why wouldn't they support her? She just simply thinks that they would. And I think that makes her such a interesting but also a very flawed character as a result. And that's what I think makes for such a great lead, is someone that is always making these mistakes and is always putting themselves in, active harm and things like that. But you latch onto Rhaenyra because of how much, that passion that she has, the way that she wants to try to break out and become something more. You're hoping that she does, but she constantly puts herself in situations that actively prevent her from achieving that. And so I think that on one hand, yes, I think she would be a very good queen, as she has that ambition, she has that drive, she's willing to defend herself, she has people surrounding her that care about her, but she also has made a lot of decisions that has held her back. She's always going to have the fact that she has children that are bastards. She always is going to have the fact that she made decisions to turn Alicent away from her. There are moments where Alicent is, and I'll talk about this with Alicent a little bit, but like Alicent is actively defending Rhaenyra, but Rhaenyra does things that causes her to simply not be able to anymore. And so, yes, I think in some ways Rhaenyra should have that title, but on the other hand, she exhibits so many of the same qualities as Viserys, and we saw how his rule turned out. I think that really the key thing about this show at the end of the day is about this sort of recurring cycle of sorts, and sort of seeing how things haven't gotten any better, and kind of see similarities in the sense where there is this endless cycle of sorts, and I think we see that through Rhaenyra in this show. So while I think there is so much to love about her, and she is a fantastic character on her own, to say that she is perfect and doesn't have any flaws, I think is just not really representative of her character. And I think that's something that, again, this show just does so well, is that there's just so many layers, there's so many hidden nuances, and especially on a rewatch, there's so many more things that you catch on to. And I think I really saw that with Rhaenyra throughout this show. However, the character I think did the biggest 180 on is that of Alicent, who, I will be honest, when I watched this show the first time around, I did see it as, well, Alicent really is the villain here. Alicent really is the person that is responsible for a lot of what's happened. If Alicent wouldn't have done this, then maybe things wouldn't have gone the way they did. And I think that, there are things that Alicent does in this show that are very questionable. I think there are a lot of things that Alicent partakes in particular, where it's like, why are you deciding to do this? But what I think is constantly overlooked by many people throughout the show is that this is a woman who has very little control of the situation within her life. So much of what ends up happening to this character is because of, stuff that she was pressured into doing, stuff that she was manipulated into doing. That's so much of who her character really is. And I think that Emily Carey represents this very well. She kind of shows the youthful and optimistic nature that Alicent used to have. Someone who really, I think, just wanted to live a normal life. I don't think she wanted any of this royal stature. I don't think she wanted to deal with any of the politics or any of the stuff that she deals with in the show. I think she just wanted to be able to just kind of have fun and be her own person. And I think that Carey does a great job with that. But Olivia Cooke, that's the performance that really is one of the ones that sticks out to me. I think does an even better job of showing that Alicent is someone who, yes, as we see, is much more ruthless and cold-hearted, but she also is, I think, very regretful of the choices that she has made. She doesn't like the fact that she is in this position. She wishes that she could have just lived a normal life. She wasn't ready for all these responsibilities that were mounted onto her. What was it, she didn't realize what it would mean to be the wife of Viserys, because she really was just a kid, and we really see how much was taken away from her as a result. So I actually think that Alicent is a far more sympathetic character than people do give her credit for. I mean, to her credit, she is this very honorable woman. She has this undying love for her family. She's always going to remain loyal to the Hightowers, and that's where her, that's what's always going to matter to her. The making sure that the Hightowers are respected, making sure that the Hightowers are beloved, that really is her main priority at the end of the day, and she wants to do whatever she can to represent that. But I also think that she generally does have a love for Rhaenyra. I think that their friendship was very genuine to her. This was something that she cared a lot about. I mean, we see in this show that even though the two of them are constantly falling out, and there's always these misunderstandings, there always is this tension between them, so much of it is based on misunderstandings. I mean, a big one is Rhaenyra assuming that Alicent held this marriage from her, that Alicent knew that Viserys was going to choose her, and she deliberately held it from her. But the second that she finds out that's not the case, they're able to just go back to being friends. Or you have Alicent who, Rhaenyra lies to her about what happened, and it seems like that's going to be a big turning point for them. And, her deliberately lying about the fact that she slept with Criston while being told that it was Daemon, but then being told that it was Criston, and him outing Rhaenyra, him outing that secret to Alicent, which, yeah, like I said, Criston definitely, I understand why why he decided to make that choice, but definitely not the most likable of characters. Kind of a piece of shit in that way. And you can kind of see just, again, how easily bruised he is by what ended up happening, and how he isn't able to really let go of that. But even after that, they are still willing to make amends. When Viserys talks about putting aside all of the bloodshed, putting aside all of the tension, Alicent is willing and ready to just, make amends with Rhaenyra. When Rhaenyra says to her, "I will be back," Alicent believes her. So you can see that she never really wants to harm Rhaenyra. She never wants to cause any real misery to her. but she feels like because of her situation and because of all the people around her, she has to. And this is really where we get into how, what might be a hot take for some. I don't think Alicent is a vindictive person. I think everybody around her, however, is. And I think that is why things turn out the way that they do. Think about who her two most trusted allies are. If we just talk about this show in general, who are the two people that she is most loyal to? Well, you have Otto, who I'll talk about in a bit. I don't think Otto is completely heartless either. I think there's a reason why he believes what he does. But then you also have Larys, who, very much the character that out of everybody is the most in it for himself. He is willing to do whatever he can to get his hands dirty, to just continue climbing the ranks and, and doing whatever he can to get put into a more powerful position. So he is her most trusted confidant. So he is the person that she feels the most, that she feels like she can, he can get the most information out of, and he can, feel respected by her and things like that. That I think is why Alicent is the way that she is. I think a lot of it is influenced by other people within her life. In fact, I don't think she likes violence at all. When Larys tells her that he not only killed his own father and brother, not only that obviously is fucked up, but it's not even that she is repulsed by. It's the fact that he ended up killing them when that's never what she intended. She never wanted him to, kill them in the manner that he did. She just wanted to do whatever, she just wanted to, do something to punish them. She never wanted to actually hurt them in that way. And so even when, yes, she is ready to take out Luke's eye, it's not because she has this, hatred towards Luke. It's because, well, you hurt my son, and I need to get, and I'm going to get revenge as a result, and I'm going to be this parent, because at the end of the day, she loves her kids, and she's always going to feel this love towards her kids as a result. And I think that's something that we really do see, but also, again, how much influence Otto has within her. I think there's very little agency that Alicent has had throughout her life, and she wants to have that agency. She wishes that she didn't have to be in this position. She wishes that she was never queen. She wishes that her and Rhaenyra never fell out. She always is in support of her throughout this season. She is trying to support her. She never, like I said, counts out the idea of the two of them reconciling their differences. So I think that's what's so interesting about Alicent is, yes, there are things that she does throughout the show that could be seen as unjust. The way that she is willing to defend her children, for example, no matter what they do, that's something that, is hard to get behind. The way that she is actively putting people in danger, yes, that is hard to get behind, but I think at the end of the day, it's because she never wanted this title. It's because of the fact that she also has this extreme paranoia, because so much of it was, again, stemmed by Otto. Otto has gotten her to believe that Rhaenyra is, after her, that Rhaenyra is the, that the Targaryens are the enemy in that way. And because of that, she, does whatever she can to shut down any instance of her children bonding with Rhaenyra's children. There's a moment where it seems like they're going to, but she shuts it down because she doesn't want them to get too close, because she generally believes that they will lose power, and therefore, they're going to be disregarded, and Rhaenyra's not going to take her, and, Rhaenyra's going to take that title away. She's going to kill Aemon. She's going to kill Aegon. She starts to believe that because of the fact that, one, I think Rhaenyra has done enough to prove that that might be the case. Two, because, again, how much of it is stemmed from her father's influence. And that is why I've never really understood why people have an issue with her misinterpreting Viserys's words, because I never really saw it as her misinterpreting what he said. What I saw it as, especially on this rewatch, is that he is now doing what he can to justify her actions. She has been propped up by Otto to constantly do what she can to prove that Aegon should be on the throne, that Aegon is the one that should, he is the one that is meant to lead. He is the one that is meant to be in this position. We need to do what we can to convince people of that. And I think that in the back of her mind, she's thought, well, does this make sense? Is this something that I should be doing? I think that's why she keeps out hope for Rhaenyra, but I think Viserys now saying it, even though maybe that wasn't what he intended. It wasn't what he intended, obviously. But her now hearing him say Aegon, that kind of gives her the that kind of gives her that justification. That kind of gives her that sort of reasoning now. That gives her that confirmation that yes, what I'm doing is correct. He wanted Aegon to be on the throne, so therefore Aegon should be on the throne. And that is how she is viewing it now. So I don't see it at all as, oh, she misinterpreted what he said and this is what Viserys wanted. I see it as, well, now she can use that reasoning as a way to justify her motives, justify her actions, because maybe, I think in the back of her mind, I mean, let's not forget, Aegon literally raped a woman prior to, Viserys doing that in the same episode, and she was saying that she, didn't see him as her son and things like that. I think she was starting to waver. I think she was starting to believe that Rhaenyra should be the one on the throne. She was seeing the way the people were defending Rhaenyra. She was seeing the strength that she had, but she also was seeing Rhaenyra's composure when she needed to be. And I think that's something that she really did respect. But now Viserys has said it has to be Aegon, so I think Alicent now feels that, you know what, maybe now it has a purpose. Maybe now what I'm doing has justification behind it. And so I think that is what's so interesting about her character. I just don't see Rhaenyra as, I just don't see Alicent as, like I said, this sort of vindictive sort of presence. I don't see her that way anymore. Maybe the first time I watched this show, yes, but I really think on a rewatch, especially now, seeing the influence that Otto has over her, it really gets you to understand why she is this way. And it also gets you to understand that she isn't this person. She isn't this monster. She isn't somebody that is heartless. She cares for the people within her life, and that is why things have turned out the way they have for her. So I think in many ways, Alicent's actually one of the most sympathetic characters of this entire show because of how little of her situation she actually is in control of.
Now, the one thing I do want to make abundantly clear in this video, because I don't think I talked about this enough, maybe I talk about it later, and if I do, I'm not going to end up adding this part into the video, but just because I am saying that I think Alicent is a more sympathetic character than people portray her as, don't suspect for a second that I am Team Green, because I'm really not. To be honest with you, when I first watched this show, yes, I was very much, staunchly Team Black because I felt more invested in those characters. But now on a rewatch, I kind of realized that, the Team Green and Team Black of it all is kind of pointless because at the end of the day, neither of them are fit to rule. And I think that's something that the show gets into really well. They both have valid reasons as to why they think that their side should be on the throne. Alicent because of her father's manipulation, but also feeling like, Rhaenyra is a direct threat to her family and needing to do something to protect, the high towers and things like that. And then Rhaenyra based on knowing that this was her destiny. This was something that, Viserys wanted. This was something that was bestowed upon her. She deserves it. This is something that she has earned. And I think both of them have really valid points in that way, but I don't think that picking a side is really what this show is all about. I think it's more so about the fact that so much of this conflict is so unnecessary, but it also is very... Like I said before, I think so much of the show is about that, endless cycle of violence and hate and how that continues to implode the Targaryens further and further. I think that's really what the show is all about. So I think the Team Green versus Team Black of it all, again, is just a really surface-level way of looking what is actually a very complex conflict and recognizing that all these characters have reasons for feeling the way that they do. Yes, you can choose one side over the other, but I think at the end of the day, it's kind of pointless because, one, we know how this show's going to end. Two, neither of them are really right with what they're doing, and I think the show showcases that very well.
And then I just want to talk about a few more characters before we get a little bit deeper into the children, because I want to talk about that in a little bit. Otto as a character, I think, is another one that I viewed a little bit differently this time around. When I saw him the first time around, I viewed him as this snake. I viewed him as this monster. He was heartless. He was only in it for himself. He wanted to make sure that he was the one in power. But I think on this rewatch, you see it, I kind of saw it as, well, yes, he's saying this, but that's because he believes it. Otto believes everything that he is saying. He thinks that the Hightowers have to be in power. He believes that any sense of the Targaryens being on the throne is just going to lead to their demise. It's just going to lead to the collapse of Westeros. He believes that Rhaenyra is going to kill Aemon and she's going to kill Aegon. He believes the things that he is selling, and as a result, he thinks that this is the only solution. He isn't willing to listen to any other point of view, because in his mind, the ends justify the means. That is the character that he is, and I think that is what is so interesting about Otto on this rewatch, is that, yes, you could see him as this sort of hateful monster, but again, he feels that way. He generally believes that, and he has an actual motivation. And yes, it causes this strain with Alicent. He is incredibly he is incredibly I wouldn't say abusive. I don't think he's abusive, but he is very manipulative towards her. He controls her in a way that other characters simply don't, but I also think he has this genuine love for Alicent. He thinks that this is the best thing for her. He thinks that her, getting to be with Viserys and marrying him, that was the correct move. He thinks that Aegon being king is the correct move. Everything he does, he thinks is correct. He never is able to challenge it in any way, and I think that is what's so interesting about Otto overall. So again, I don't see Otto or any character in the show really as complete and utter scum. Even the worst characters in the show, I think, have a purpose to them. I think characters, they have a reason for why they are this way, and I think that really just speaks again to just how incredible the characters are in the show. I think the only other character I really want to talk about here is Rhaenys, because I think she's such an interesting character in this show. She's someone who was denied the title of queen, and I think in her, she always has believed that she should be queen, but she also doesn't want any reminder of what she was denied. Whenever someone is bringing it up to her, specifically Alicent in episode 9, she doesn't want any reminder of that. When she asks Alicent, did you ever want to be queen? She knows the answer is no. She knows that Alicent didn't want this, and I think it's because she is just so annoyed by how things have turned out, but she also is accepting her situation. She knows that she can't do anything about it, and so she's dedicating her life to work with the people that she feels should be in power. She sees the good in Rhaenyra because she saw her composure, and she saw the way the people defended her. And maybe at first she was against what she was doing. She didn't want Rhaenyra to end up on that Iron Throne, but I think Rhaenys sees it as I think she sees it as Rhaenyra respects her. That family respects her, and she needs to stick with them as a result. And I think that's what makes her character so interesting to watch throughout the show. That moment where she ends up, yes, there is that moment where she, kills a bunch of innocents. And yes, maybe that moment is a little ridiculous. Maybe they should have rethought the way the writing was done there. But you know what? I just really love seeing Rhaenys as someone who is fully independent. There's so many characters in this show who aren't in control of their own fates, and Rhaenys is someone who has taken control and accepted her situation, and as someone who was denied the title of what she really wanted to be, she has this strength in her that some of these characters in the show just simply do not have, and I think that's what makes her such a compelling and rootable character as a result. So that's someone else that I just really loved watching throughout this show. And then the only other characters I'm going to talk about here really are the kids. And I'm not going to say too much about them, because I think what's important to note about all of the children in this show is that they really are products of their parents. Aside from Helena, who is really the only character that is truly innocent, genuinely just cares about what's going on. She sees the best in everybody. She doesn't have any love for Aegon, but that's because she doesn't really care for the Iron Throne. That's not something that matters to her. She's way more into this, dreamlike dragons and things like that. She's also a very quirky character in that way, but she also isn't taken very seriously. And as a result, she's not someone that people have a lot of confidence in. So she's not really someone that people are really looking at. But I think what's interesting about Helena is that she is someone that's going to emerge as someone that is far more intelligent and someone who is far more wise beyond her years, and I think we're going to see that throughout this show. But aside from her, none of these kids were able to have a normal childhood. I mean, like I said, any time that the Hightowers were bonding with the Targaryens, or the Targaryens were bonding with the Velaryons, they were admonished for it. They were reprimanded for hanging out with them. They didn't want any sort of connection. And so they have had to live this life conditioned to believe that they need to be against each other, that they need to be vengeful toward, that they need to have this vitriol towards each other. And as a result, a lot of them are very disturbed. They're very resentful. They're very angry. And they're just not... They don't have qualities of their own. When you look at Aegon, for example, the worst of the bunch, for sure. I mean, he is a complete sadist. He is frequently drinking. He is he commits a ton of just really fucked up acts throughout the show, especially what he did to Diane. I mean, my God, that shit was just absolutely deplorable. One of easily the most vile things anybody has done in this show. And I think that's something we really, I think that's something that, it's easy to see Aegon as the worst as a result, and I think he very much is. He's very selfish, but I think it's also important to note that he's someone that is very similar to, he is very similar in the sense where he wants to be appreciated and cared for, but I think it's also good to recognize that there's a reason why Aegon is this way, and that's because at the end of the day, he really is just someone who wants to be appreciated and cared for because he never really was as a child. Everybody in his life constantly either reprimanded him or just didn't see him as somebody that they wanted to invest in. And because of that, I think that's the reason why... we have episode 9 where he talks about how I don't want to be king. I don't want this title. This is not something I wanted. He literally is trying to keep Aemond from, letting him go into, to go to the ceremony. He doesn't want this at all. But the second that he is, applauded for it and people are generally appreciating him, he's embracing it because now people are seeing him as somebody that actually, people are actually appreciating him. People are actually giving him that love and that embrace in a way that he hasn't before. And so I think that that's something about Aegon, is that he has this very power-hungry nature to him, and I think we're going to see that throughout the show, but I think so much of that is due to the fact that he was so neglected as a child. And despite the fact that he's partaking in all these inhumane acts, he really is in deep pain. There's that great scene with, Alicent, where she is chastising him, rightfully so, for what he did to Diane, and he kind of frames it as, well, I never really wanted to be this way. I never really wanted to turn out this way, and you can see that he is deeply ashamed of who he is, but the thing with Aegon, similar to a lot of characters in the show, is that he never really does anything to try to change it, because I don't think, one, he really can change it. He kind of was forced into this situation from the beginning where he was told that he was supposed to be this way, and so he is this way as a result. But he also has that self-awareness. He knows he knows that he shouldn't act this way, and now I think making him king is so much more dangerous for everyone around him, and I think that's something that we're going to see here, in that, similar to Viserys, he's someone who has had this title bestowed upon him that really never should have had it. There's no reason. Aegon really just should have never been king in any scenario whatsoever, and I think in season 2, we're really going to see how much that affects these characters negatively. As much as Alicent and Otto are trying to defend it, I think there's only so much you can do, because I think Aegon really, at the end of the day, is this lost cause. He isn't willing to change himself. He isn't willing to do anything to figure out why he is this way. He knows why he is this way, but he, again, isn't really able to do much, and I think that's what's so interesting about Aegon as a character. And then when it comes to Aemond, what I really like about both of them is that they mirror their fathers. When it comes to Aegon, he mirrors Viserys, and then when it comes to Aemond, he mirrors his uncle in Daemon. He, mirrors the demeanor that Daemon has, but what I think is so interesting about Aemond, he really isn't as violent as he comes across. Yes, he comes off very brash. He comes off very intimidating. He has this hatred towards he has this hatred towards his other cousins. He's very resentful towards Lucerys, but I think that his bark is way worse than his bite, and I think we see that especially towards the end of this show when Lucerys dies, which, my God, what a shocking moment that was. he actually feels remorseful. I don't think he ever wanted Lucerys to die. I think he wanted to taunt him, and I think he wanted to scare him, but I don't think he ever actually wanted to kill anybody. And I think that's the interesting thing about Aemond and a lot of these characters, that again, he doesn't have much control over his situation. He's told from a young age that, like, yes, you are supposed to be against the Targaryens. You are supposed to hate that family, but I don't think he ever really did. I think he has been conditioned to feel that way, and because of the fact that Luke took away his eye, he's going to always have that vitriol towards him, but he never wanted him to die. And I think I'm hoping where they go with Aemond in season 2, I think where they're going to go with him is we're going to see an Aemond that is way more remorseful, someone who is way more willing to change his behavior in a way that Aegon simply isn't able to. And I think that's something that we're going to see. And so, again, I think he's a really interesting character because he's someone who is in constant need to defend himself, but I think he also doesn't have those violent tendencies, or at least he doesn't want to have those violent tendencies. I think that he is someone who he's willing to call somebody out. He's willing to, he's willing to bully, but he's never willing to cause harm to somebody. And so you see that with Aemond. That's kind of his character. That's kind of who he is. But then you have, like, say, Jacaerys, who, again, sort of now has to assume this role as the sole child of Rhaenyra. And so it's going to be interesting to see how that all plays out. But again, I think what it really comes down to is that these kids, they're just not normal kids because of the fact that they weren't able to be. They weren't able to be loved. They weren't able to have that respect. They weren't able to live normal lives. And as a result, it's kind of similar to their parents, where they have now adopted tendencies that they are ashamed of, but yet have very little control over because of the situation that they were thrown into. So I think that's what's so interesting about these characters, is that they have these distinct traits of their own, but so much of it is mirroring their predecessors. And I think we see that throughout this show. So I think the way this show dives into, like, generational trauma, but also showing, after effects and these recurring cycles, it's just so on point. And I really think that's why at the end of the day, House of the Dragon is a tragedy. And I think we really showcase that, especially through these kids. So after all that, I think it's pretty safe to say that House of the Dragon really has so much going for it. And I think there's so much that this first season does so incredibly well, whether it comes to showcasing these characters and getting us to understand all their motivations, but also showcasing just how nuanced so much of this story is. Yes, we see similar traits in characters that we've seen in Game of Thrones, but this story is nothing like Game of Thrones. Game of Thrones, getting the Iron Throne was the goal. That's something that we wanted to see these characters end up on. We wanted to see these characters, we wanted to see these characters triumph. We wanted to see these characters overcome adversity. These characters, on the other hand, we don't necessarily want to see that, or at least I don't think that's what this show is really all about. I think it's about showing how much the Iron Throne has eroded everybody's view, and it has caused them to feel that this is their own, and how much it has caused everybody to stifle them from achieving the lives that they wanted to achieve, to keep themselves from getting to become their own individuals. So many of these characters, like I said, they don't get to live their own lives. They don't get to have their own sort of viewpoints because they are constantly controlled by others around them. And I think that is what's so compelling about this show overall. Even these characters that commits the worst deeds, they have their reasonings for why they do them. It's not justifying why they're doing them, but it's getting you to understand why they're doing them. And that is what a great TV show can really do, is getting you to latch onto a character, but also getting you to utterly hate that character's decisions. I think there is an easy middle ground there, and I think that's something that House of the Dragon just does such incredibly well. The way the show represents the grayness in all these characters, but also, again, showcases things like generational trauma, showcases so much of the anguish that they end up undergoing. The way the show kind of shows this, like, cycle of abuse, but also this cycle of similar behaviors, I think is just so incredibly on point. And while, yes, I think some such sprawling visuals and incredible score, such well realized characters and also so many shocking moments. What I love about the shocking moments in the show is that every single one feels natural. There isn't a moment in the show that doesn't make sense. There isn't a moment in the show that feels like that doesn't feel like something these characters would do. Everything feels like something these characters would partake in, and I think that's something that they just do a really strong job with here. And when it comes to season 2, I mean, there's so many avenues that this can really go. I think season 1 did such a great job of just setting up the conflict and really igniting the tension between these characters, to where season 2, it's just going to be full-on chaos and full-on revenge, and I cannot wait to see how it really does end up playing out. Sometimes there are storylines that feel a bit truncated because of the nature of the constant time jumps throughout the show. I think the way they go about it is the best way they could have handled it. There are a couple things I wish that maybe they could have dived a bit further into, but other than that, I mean, I was just really impressed by this first season and how well it did a great job of establishing its own identity, but also kind of recognizing what came before and forging its own path by the end of the show. Like I said, I think on a rewatch especially, it really just reaffirmed how much I really love this series. I think if they're able to continue the trajectory that this is going down, this could honestly be in the same vein as like a Better Call Saul, where it's a show that it exhibits a lot of the same traits of its predecessor, but it does it in a completely different way and also is able to fully stand out on its own, and in some ways maybe even better than the show that preceded it. I think that's something that House of the Dragon just does such a great job of asserting itself as. I just really love this first season overall. I'm so happy I was able to finally talk about it, and I am going to give this first season of House of the Dragon overall an A. But that's it for basically this overview, but also kind of an analysis of the first season of House of the Dragon. Moving forward, I will be doing weekly reviews for every episode. I know the first episode of season 2 has been out for like almost a week now. I will get to that very soon. I promise. I haven't been able to do this review until now. I hope you understand that. But other than that, guys, over this video, hope you guys enjoyed it. Let me know what you guys saw this first season overall. Left your thoughts on all of that. We'll see you guys in my next video, and we'll see you guys for that. Okay, bye.